Now that we've unraveled the diversity in human sex and gender and orientation, it's time to talk about pleasure. We discussed that relative principles, how things like yin and yang, masculine, feminine, only exist in relation to one another. My absolute favorite quote, and I quote it all the time, is from this book called Master and Margarita. What would the earth look like if all the shadows disappeared? After all, shadows are cast by things and people. Here's the shadow of my sword. But shadows also come from trees and living beings. Do you want to strip the earth of all trees and living things just because of your fantasy of enjoying naked light? This is a quote by the devil saying it to one of the apostles, but that's neither here nor there. The thing that defines the boundary between like our bodies and the chair and the mass of us and gravity of the earth and the temperature of the air outside, everything is relative to the state of this system. Pleasure is exactly the same. It's just a sensation that's relatively enjoyable to the baseline. And the things that we each find pleasurable are a matter of association through connection and sensation. Learning to be honest with ourselves about what we find pleasurable can be incredibly triggering when we were shamed for having enjoyment. Maybe you heard the podcast that Nicole Oracle and I do where we discuss the healing potential of BDSM. And in that conversation, we talk about how the power dynamics in BDSM, all of the polarities, right? Bondage and discipline. There's somebody handing out rules, dom and sub, sadist, masochist. These are just relational patterns that we crave from childhood, whether we pursue them in a sexual dynamic or not. Fetishes are just formed through caregiver relationships between 3 and 6, because this is the age of social connection, community, relationships. Our brain is setting up for the dopamine and norepinephrine levels that we then associate with attraction when we're older. The reactions of our caregivers during that phase of development give value to our behavior through the association between intensity and connection. If shaming is the most intense interaction that a caregiver has with a child, the child will associate shame with connection. If giving orders is the most intense interaction that a caregiver has with a child will associate direction with connection. See the pattern? What we find pleasurable is always linked back to an innocent, natural desire of a child to connect with their caregiver. Approaching depravity with compassion allows us to accept our desires just as they are. Being honest with ourselves about what we find fun, indulgent, playful, pleasurable allows us to then communicate that to others. Simple tip for dopamine: groom yourself, do grooming behavior. Grooming ourselves actually releases endorphins, which are opiates that turn pain into pleasure. So when we allow ourselves to indulge in our natural opiates, it literally affects our hormones. Eating affects dopamine, exercise releases endorphins, an aroused vagina makes a very particular endorphin to make rougher sex more enjoyable. Make of that what you will. What humans find pleasurable is extraordinary. Sensation, power, pain, pleasure, chemistry. When we approach our sexual relationships with self-acceptance, discerning our partners really well, and enthusiasm is beautiful. If you're having trouble connecting to your own pleasure, I invite you to be curious to explore what feels good to your body. This doesn't necessarily mean masturbating. It can be literally anything. Walking, dancing, climbing, jumping, biking, lifting weights, doing yoga. How do those things make you feel? How does your food make you feel? Savor your food. Sense the air around you. Notice the beauty. And yeah, masturbate. The ability to find eroticism in day-to-day life allows us to magnetically attract what we desire. Society encourages us to giggle about Kama Sutra and misconstrues tantric. So here's another piece of information that needs to be common knowledge. Tantra is about the practice of sensually enjoying all of life and the intentional seeking of eroticism in all dimensions of existence. By embracing our pleasure, we align with our highest good. By accepting our true desires, we become true to ourselves. And when we're true to ourselves, we are able to allow others to do the same.